For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God and the salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek.
May God bless you, and I hope this is a great day for you with Christ. Welcome to Today with Christ. I'm Don Smith here at the Radio Bible Hour with my friend Scott Ingram, a pastor here in East Tennessee and a co-worker here at the Radio Bible Hour. And Scott, I have a student in college right now. One just graduated in a secular university, and I, like many parents, Christian parents, have been concerned about our children in the secular state universities. And those young people are exposed to direct attacks on their faith. It used to be that they just heard another point of view, but now they're deliberate, pointed attacks on Christian faith in the universities. And we recently heard of an international ministry that is really responding to this negativism in the universities. It's called Ratio Christi, which is a Latin phrase that just means reasons for Christ. And its purpose is to teach students and faculty who are Christians to defend their faith.
This is definitely a ministry that we need to get behind, because where else do we want to reach in and change the future if it not be in our young people? Our young people who are growing up in a generation right now devoid of the Word of God. Even when I was a young child, we would go to school and there would be maybe a Bible sitting on the desk of the teacher, or there would be an opening. I remember praying in school, and yet now we are in a situation where it's not just we won't have the Bible, we won't have the prayer. Now we're going to tell you why you shouldn't have that Bible and why you shouldn't have that prayer, and have it directed at you from a person who is an authority, being a teacher, who controls a lot of money that you've just put in here to go to this school. So this is really almost a persecution type thing here in the universities. So we need to be mindful of that.
And the consequences are very dangerous. My wife and I had dinner in the last week with a dear Christian couple, strong in their faith, raised their children in the faith. One of their children went off to the state university where he is in one of the athletic programs and scholarship. He was introduced to smoking marijuana first in that athletic complex of kids, had his faith questioned. Now, the reason we were having dinner with him was to help them with some advice. He had just been removed from the hospital after an overdose. He's wandering around the country, really, really lost, denies his faith, says he's an atheist because of what he learned at the university. And I wanted to say, well, how's that working out for you, to him? How is that rejection of your faith? Has that led to a happier life for you? No, it's led to your near death. And so these are life and death issues. It's easy for a PhD in philosophy or with all that power and authority to challenge the faith of even a very strong person in faith who's 18 years old. And to me, it's almost like intellectual child abuse that takes place. If I'm a professor, 40, 50 years old, I've been around the block, I have lost my faith or have no faith, to inflict that kind of damage on a child, those professors and those teachers and those coaches that supported that destruction of faith are going to have to answer for God for the lives of these children. And so Scott contacted the group, and they referred him to a young lady, Anna Rose Kitko, from who is at the University of Tennessee in the role of a supported missionary for Ratio Christi. Wonderful Christian young woman. And so we contacted her, invited her to come over for an interview, and we were just thrilled to hear the expression of her faith.
Yes, and Anna, she reminds me a lot of Daniel in the lion's den, because going into these secular universities, you're moving into an area where they're not so comfortable about the Bible. They think let's put this aside, let's look at these other things. But Anna stands for a faith. And the funny thing about all of that is, this Bible can absolutely be defended. There is absolute years and years of men and women who have sat and studied over its words and not been able to prove it wrong. So Anna can show us that. She is an apologist, and we're going to see that today in the ministry that she's going to present to us. So I hope you'll enjoy this interview.
Anna, thank you for being with us today, and we're just going to talk a little bit about your work as basically a kind of missionary at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville for this organization that we've mentioned. And I'm going to ask you a little bit today to share with our audience what your work is and the reason for the work that you're doing, and some of the challenges that you face in your ministry on a secular university campus.
Absolutely. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and we're glad to have you.
Well, I can tell you that it's a challenge working as a missionary apologist. So what we do with Ratio Christi, it's Campus Apologetics Alliance. We are a network of Christian apologists. Usually, most of us are formally trained if we're placed on a college campus. Some of us not as much, but it's a structure and a network, and it's a global ministry that places formal apologists on college campuses around the world. And the goal of this ministry is to teach, train, equip students and faculty predominantly, as well as the lay people in the area where we serve, in Christian apologetics specifically, which is the defense of the faith. So we're a highly specialized parachurch ministry. We're a relief ministry for pastors. We're there to answer questions, all the really tough questions, the things that you're afraid to ask your pastor, right? When you're in church, it's not really a dynamic experience, right? You're listening to the preaching, and pastors don't always have the time and energy. I mean, it's a 24-hour, 7 days a week job, and we're here to relieve them. So a lot of us are trained in seminary, so we're trustworthy. You can come to us about Bible questions and know that we've put in the work to train ourselves, and then to help relieve them and to teach and train the lay people in our area in that way.
Wonderful. So Ratio Christi is worldwide now, I understand. It's
Yes.
really grown from its beginnings.
Yes, now it's a global ministry. It's an international ministry. We're in several countries globally, mostly in the continental U.S., and the goal is to be on 500 campuses in the next 5 years.
Wow.
So we're
That's
growing pretty
amazing.
fast. We're growing
That's
faster than we
really
can
neat.
keep up with, really.
Yeah. Well, more and more people are hearing about your work, and I know as a parent of a college student, in fact, one has just graduated, one's at UT, and I have a young one who'll be going to university in another year or so. And it's a concern for parents, especially Christian parents like me, when our kids go, they've grown up within a Christian framework, they've accepted Christ, they've gone on into higher education, and sometimes for the first time they find their faith really comes under attack.
Absolutely.
And not just indirectly challenged, but actively and sometimes very aggressively ridiculed or challenged.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing with Ratio Christi, and especially with our apologists, is that parents and grandparents are pouring countless hours and hundreds of dollars into their children and raising them in a Christian environment. And it's almost, especially in the Bible Belt and in evangelical Christianity, we're seeing almost this kind of bubble emerging. And it's where our kids are being raised in an environment where it's just assumed, Christianity is assumed constantly. They're very well versed in the scriptures, but they're not necessarily well versed in challenging the scriptures because they simply are in an environment where that doesn't happen very often. And so once they exit the bubble, as I put it, and into the university sphere, the first thing they get is faced with men and women with more degrees than a thermometer, as Matt Slick says of the Christian Apologetics Research Ministry, who are challenging their faith and are going to militantly work to make certain that their Christianity is left. And in fact, that's what's happening. We're seeing about 70% of college freshmen walk away from the faith that they have previously professed by the end of their freshman year. And it's my job to go in there and step into that gap between the students' backgrounds and then the secular forum that they're going into that we need them to go into, and to help equip and engage them in that particular way, and to act as a buffer between them and their secular faculty.
And the power of the authority figure. I mean, I
Absolutely.
worked in the university environment for many years, was a professor at Florida Tech for about 10 years of my career, and I know how much influence and power. Now, I had mostly graduate students, and they didn't mind arguing with me and challenging me most of the time. But for undergraduates, a professor is an incredibly intimidating and powerful figure in their lives. They literally hold the power of certainly their economic future in their hands very often. Young people are often very frightened by that authority because the professor has serious power to influence, disrupt, or facilitate one's academic career and possibly one's future.
Absolutely. And on top of that, what we're seeing too is, I mean, I can go back when I was 18, you know, it's the first time you're out of your parents' house and you're doing your own thing. And as soon as you walk into that environment and the professor's job, the first thing they do is say, oh, you were a Christian and your parents raised you that way. They didn't know what they were talking about. And you kind of engage with that a little bit because, you know, you're a Popinjay 18-year-old
Right.
and you're like, oh, well, I suspected my parents didn't know what they were talking about for a while too.
So it appeals to that natural
Absolutely.
adolescent rebelliousness
Absolutely.
anyway.
Absolutely. And then on top
Yeah.
of that, they're being introduced to things they've never seen before.
Right.
And in a time period that's particularly difficult to battle sin. And so if you have nowhere to go to ask these questions and to really go, okay, well, I'm doubting here or I'm challenged by this, it's much easier to just walk away.
Interesting.
So that's what
Yeah.
Ratio Christi wants to fight. We
Neat.
We really want
Yeah.
to step into that gap and be
Now,
that.
you used the term, you said apologetics
Yes.
or apologist, described yourself. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about what that is? What does it mean? I mean, we think of apology as sort of giving reasons why we're sorry about something. But in the technical language of philosophy and history of theology, that has a very specific use.
It does. It does
Yeah.
have a very specific use. So apologetics is the study of the defense of the faith. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which means defense, and we see it translated several times that way in the New Testament, especially when we're talking in about giving a defense for the hope that is in us. That word defense is apologia in Greek. And so historically and in the history of the church, the apologist was the person who was responsible for engaging the secular society in which they were found, or just culture in general, and defending the faith in an introductory way. So they would step out and provide the people in their environment to challenge them. So Paul at the Areopagus, for example, in Acts. And it's there that you are defending Christianity. And it's there that you are allowing people to challenge you to demonstrate that you do possess the truth, because that's what we believe. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And if he is the truth, then it will be very easy to demonstrate that. And that's what apologetics is. So then historically, within the history of the church, there have been specific men and women called to be apologists. And that was a role that was different than an evangelist or a preacher or teacher. And that's where you're going and engaging on a regular basis for that exact purpose, and so that your audience can see that you have very good reasons for the hope that is in us,
Right.
and that we're willing to talk about them.
What's your daily life like? What does a Christian apologist do when you get up in the morning and go to work, and what's it like?
Well, I jokingly start off with Martin Luther's quote, which is how I feel. I have so much work to do that I'm going to spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Okay.
Yeah.
that's how I feel. So yeah. So when we get up in the morning, it's usually for me. I can't speak for all apologists, but it's a devotion, and then I go and I hit where everybody's asking questions. So I'm hit with questions more often, email, text messages. Then on top of that, we have meetings on campus. The University of Tennessee is where I'm stationed. We have Ratio Christi professor meetings. That's on Tuesdays, where I serve the professors and their needs, equipping them with where they feel that they need more emphasis. For example, we've partnered with Alliance for Defending Freedom, which is a wonderful legal team that deals with our rights as Christians and in a way that it extends to our free speech on campus and what that looks like. So I can help train and equip the professors with their rights and to understand that, although they may be a minority on campus as far as spiritually, that they do have certain rights and in how they can talk about Jesus in their classroom and use their vocation as their mission, which is ultimately what we're all here to do, is to use the design that God made us to accomplish the Great Commission. So then on top of that, we teach and train students, and this is a nightly, Wednesday night thing, weekly night, where the students are putting forth questions that they have that they want me to cover as an apologist to teach them the background. So for example, we just did an intensive, a 4-week intensive on Islam, and then they wanted to do a study on the positive confession movement and how that came about, why televangelism is a thing and what are the dangers of televangelism and what are the positives. We've done, for example, I'm the cults and new religion specialist for our national staff team. So my students are trained a lot in cult psychology and how recruitment happens and why it happens. So we've done studies in Scientology, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, all of these groups and groups that are actively being promoted on campus, because I want my students to make sure that they're out watching to make sure other students don't do the same thing. On top of that, we have a program called the Legatus Christi program, and that's Ambassadors for Christ. That's where I not only want to make my students trained themselves and what their doubts are and how I can answer those doubts and the regular arguments they'll probably be facing in the classroom. But on top of that, to take it a step further, which is the active role of the apologist in evangelism to their fellow students. So not only are they providing answers to their professors for their own sakes, they're providing answers to their friends and faculty for their sakes as well.
Wow.
So it's walking out the faith in
busy.
the vocation.
You're not kidding.
In the vocation where they are. So I'm training constantly, and it's mostly answering questions and preparing to train further. We also have Ratio Christi Television, which just launched. We're very proud of it, and so we'll be preparing for that. That airs in North Africa and mostly the Middle East.
Fantastic.
Here in the continental U.S. Yeah. So.
We'll have some links to you and your work at University of Tennessee and learn more about really the importance of this work. And all of us are concerned about what's happening in our educational system and the kind of, we call it secular, but it's not. It's really an indoctrination in a secular worldview, which really is more like a secular religion in a way. It has certain principles that it believes that are taken as absolutes, and it has certain doctrines about behavior and right and wrong, some of which are okay, some of which are terrible and lead to all sorts of pain and suffering and so forth, as any point of view that attempts to exclude God is naturally going to do. But it's really, really important, I think, for Christians to understand how to defend the faith, how to contend for the faith is another kind of definition of apologist, and really to understand and to equip ourselves to face these kinds of things, because it's directed. The opposition to the Christian faith it has leadership, it has a philosophy, it has an organization, many organizations which push it.
Well, and it's even evangelistic now. We look at Peter Boghossian, who's the physics professor at the University of Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. He just put out a manual for creating atheists, where he equates worship and faith and Christianity implicitly, but faith in general, as a sickness that is infecting people. And it's the job of the atheist to become a street evangelist for atheism in order to stop the infection from spreading. It's militant. It's striking to me, and he's a physics professor.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
And a lot of this, I think, is sort of post-Marxist influence as well.
Sure.
And I mean, one of the doctrines of basic Marxism was that religion is the opiate of the masses, and that it numbs people to the realities of their economic bondage, and on and on. And that influence, I think, is very much still present in our world today, that regards any kind of religion to some extent as the enemy. But the focus on Christianity is very interesting, because it sort of combines this sort of postmodern leftist political movement with movements like Islam. And those two are natural enemies, and at some point they will fight to the death.
Absolutely.
But they both are aligned against Christianity.
Yes.
And so, politics makes strange bedfellows, as they say. And so they've sort of formed this unholy alliance to attack the Christian faith.
Yes. I forget who said it. I was reading an article. They talked about that Christianity is the last bastion of hope against Islam. The tide of Islam. And I found that fascinating, and because I was reading, and it was the author was an atheist, and I forget who it was.
Dawkins, I think.
Was it
Richard
Dawkins?
Yeah,
It probably
I
was.
think so. I may have that wrong, but I think he made that confession. He said, I may have been wrong in
Which is shocking
opposing
for Richard
Christianity
Dawkins.
for all these years, because they're the only thing standing between us
Exactly.
and the executioner.
Well, and you see too, I think part of the response to Christianity from the secular realm, and from Islam too, as well as other religions, the anger and the resentment that you're seeing, it's an extremely emotional response, because when you really challenge it, it's not, there aren't a whole lot of reasons to really hate on Christianity in such a way.
Right.
And it's more of an anger towards God. I don't want to deal with this personal God of yours that tells me that he has expectations for me.
Right.
I don't want anything to do with them.
Absolutely.
And so there's just this militant anger against it.
Yeah.
And I think once we train our students, especially to be able to see that and to speak into that anger and realize that it's really extremely superficial, and we can serve and glorify God by loving the people that we're engaging with in this way, and showing and extending that love. It's not just about winning the argument, it's about winning the person.
And people get the most angry about the feelings, about the things that they feel not quite secure about.
Right.
And I think, your work provides a certain level of growth and comfort and security in one's faith that makes one not so inclined to respond back with anger.
Sure.
And very often I see Christians who try to minister, but they very quickly get caught up in defensiveness, and then defensiveness turns into anger real quickly, and then we've got, and then nobody's going to hear the gospel if we're just presenting it from a point of view of fear and anger.
Well, yes, and even in the postmodern world, back when apologetics really started to kind of gain traction, this was kind of in the early 80s when you're seeing that this focus on the apologetics kind of start to come out. We're seeing that it used to be part of the negatives of apologetics was you kind of fell into one of two categories, and that was either you were an apologist that was stuck in your office and you were just kind of reading for your own sake, or you were overly zealous to the point of almost Pharisaic, out there to just win arguments and tear people down, and neither is a glorifying thing to God.
Right.
So the beauty of what Ratio Christi tries to do is to make absolutely certain that not only are we training you with the positions, the way of reasoning critically, reasoning what's the difference between valid and sound arguments, reasoning persuasively. There's a difference between proof and persuasion, and that matters because Paul talks about the art of persuasion in 2 Corinthians. It matters. We're tearing down mental strongholds for their sake, for the sake of the person in front of you, not for your own glory.
Right.
And so Ratio Christi really focuses on making sure that our apologists and our students are being trained in their conduct, not simply the content.
And it's so tempting to move in those directions sometimes, and yet what is done without love just becomes noise.
Exactly.
And so that really is the key to this ministry. Again, I think is the sweetness with which we argue, or the kindness and the compassion with which we reason with that atheist or that Muslim.
Right.
That we do it not to tear them down, as you
No,
say,
not at
but
all.
to open a door for them that we have found completeness and fulfillment.
Exactly. And St. Augustine, for example, is talking about the blind guides of the blind in Matthew 18. What do you do with the people who are in front of you that are simply, they're just blind to what is being presented openly and honestly? And Augustine says he's working with someone else, and the other person is like, well, you just have to let them go. They're blind. And Augustine says, no. What do you do with a blind person? You bring it to them and let them feel it.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do.
That's neat. That's a beautiful way of expressing that. Well, I really want to thank you, Anna, for coming and being with us for the program today. This has been really, really eye-opening. And I think hopefully as you've watched this program, you see the value in what Anna and her colleagues are doing for our kids. Many of us have, like me, have kids in university right now, and this is a blessing, I think, from God for those parents who have been concerned about the secularization and the active opposition to Christianity in our colleges and universities. And you may want to consider supporting. Now, Anna, you're a supported missionary. That is, you depend on contributions to keep your position going.
Exactly.
And to make that happen. And would you share a little bit about how people could support you if they wanted to do that?
I would love to. One of the neglected things in how we describe the role of stewards in the church and in the body of Christ is that they are absolutely missionaries in and of themselves. So we can't all be the hands and feet. We're one body. We need support. And just as it was in the Philippian church, and Paul points this out, that the stewards themselves who are financially equipping the missionaries and the apologists who go out and do their work are credited with the work of the missionary apologist. And I can't work without the stewards behind me. I have a ministry team. They're constantly praying for me, which is absolutely necessary. And what I ask of members who are, are you being fed by what I'm saying? And if so, follow that. That's the Holy Spirit, and if that's something that you can back financially, then I ask that you prayerfully do so radically and sacrificially, because what you're doing is partnering with me on a monthly basis to make sure that this continues to happen and is provided to more and more people as we grow. And in so doing, you are stepping into that gap that we talked about earlier with me, and that's what I need. I can't do this alone. So we have stuff set up online that I'm sure will be part of the links that we provide in order to do so. And I ask that if you're turned on by this, if you're spiritually set on fire by what we're talking about, like, yes, Lord, this is exactly what we need, please consider partnering with me.
You won't go wrong by helping out this ministry. It's a strong ministry. It's a growing ministry. And, we like to point people in the direction of ways to change this world for Christ, because I tell you, folks, we definitely need some changes in this culture for Christ today. And this is one way of doing it.
And it's wonderful to see a bright young person that could really be succeeding in any field that she might choose, and yet she has responded to God's call to work to equip young people to defend their faith. That's just inspiring to me.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, we thank you for being with us for Today with Christ, and I hope you'll join us again soon for another broadcast. And again, we hope and pray that this will be a wonderful day for you with Jesus Christ.